I think the risk therapists are running is that in their attempts to educate about abuse, all of these clinical terms, diagnoses, they are expanding into really gray area territory and making it seem black and white. Like 5 early signs that you're dating a narcissist, or that this is gaslighting, or that's a boundary violation. And it's so nuanced and context dependent and murky. And people can't take that from a quick social media reel or post.
Are you going through life blind? This is Eyes Wide Open with Nick Thompson. On this podcast, we share knowledge and stories that build human connection while elevating stigmatized societal issues such as mental health, holistic wellness, culture, free speech, and more. All to ensure we show up in the world with our eyes wide open. Our guest today on the show is Dr. Isabelle Morley, who is a clinical psychologist, couples counselor, co-founder of the You Can Foundation. We work together there. Yes. Co-host of the Rom-Com Rescue podcast and author of the forthcoming book coming out this May, They're Not Gaslighting You, Ditch the Therapy Speak and Stop Hunting for Red Flags in Every Relationship, which is available for pre-order right now. That link is below. And that's the topic of discussion for today. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I am good. I'm so excited to talk to you about this book. I know I've made you talk about it a lot already, as you knew I was writing it and made you be on this journey with me. So it feels very fitting that we get to talk about it now that it's done.
Yes, I remember when we got together last summer in Boston, that when we got dinner and drinks, you were telling me about it then. And I was like, when's this thing coming out? And here we are.
Wow, that feels like a long time ago. And yet it's less than a year, I guess.
Does. But it's 6 months, 7 months. That was June.
Oh, you're right. I'm thinking of the timeline. Yeah, lots happened since June, huh?
A lot has happened since June, but we're not here to talk about all of that, just some of it. So the thing that interests me, and by the way, I got an advanced copy of the book. I've not read all of it, but I've read enough of it, I think, to hopefully have a good conversation and get some clarity on your work here. But before we get into that, what's top of mind for you these days or today?
Today, top of mind? That's a tough question, actually. Today, top of mind, does it have to be work related?
No, it can be whatever you want.
Okay.
I mean, my last 5 interviews have been like the election, so it's like...
I feel like I'm actively not thinking about that because I've spent so much of this week thinking about it. Today, it's like life logistics. Like my husband and I are thinking about moving, so it's about getting documentation in order and open houses and stuff like that. So it's really just sort of pragmatic things. Lot. It is, and it's not fun stuff. No. It's necessary stuff. It is not enjoyable. So that's what's top of mind.
When I bought my place in 2019, I remember thinking like, oh, this is going to be so fun. And then I just remember thinking like the fun is the smallest part of it.
Yes.
The rest of it is stress, signing papers until your hand feels like it's going to fall off. Then, of course, moving out and in. And then everything that goes with that, the packing, the where the hell did this go? How do I want to set up my new house? All of that stuff. So the fun piece is literally probably just looking at houses. It's not fun finding them. It's fun looking at them. And it's not fun once you decide.
It's fun before it's real. When you're like, let's just keep an eye on Zillow. And you look at the $4 million houses too, just so you can get a sense of what's out there. And then when you realize you're serious about it and you know your price limit, it just becomes highly stressful. Yeah. Yes. And I thought, because we've gone through this before, I thought I would know what I was doing this time. But it turns out I have still no clue what I'm supposed to do and what the process is.
You just need someone to do all of it, except maybe you go on Zillow and Redfin or whatever and look for houses.
That would be amazing. That would be great.
When I got this place, this was the second place that I saw, and I knew from the photos. Like my friend's my real estate agent. We've been friends a long time. And he's like, you need to see like 10 places. I'm like, no, this is the one. He's like, well, at least go see it again. So we went back like that night and I was like, no, this is the one. So that part of the fun part for me was like very, very short.
Which is unfortunate, but it worked out. I mean, they accepted your bid and here you are.
Yeah,
It's a
here I
great
am.
apartment. It's a great apartment.
Oh yeah, you have been here. I forgot.
Mm-hmm.
It is a great spot.
Yeah.
And the rooftop, can't
The
beat it in the
rooftop
summer.
is a selling point.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's lovely up there.
it is. It is great. I can't wait to be able to go back up there again because it's like 17 degrees here.
Yeah, it's a full winter
Yeah.
for
All right.
sure.
Let's dig in. Good luck with your move, by the way. This is the first
Thank
time
you.
I'm finding that out.
I know. I should have told you weeks ago, Nick. I've got to keep
Yeah.
more up to date with my life.
So are you guys like definitely doing it or are you just dabbling?
We are fully in the process of it. So it's just a matter of
Okay.
if we find a place and a bid gets accepted, and if not, we'll stay where we are, kind of thing.
Yeah. My boss just sold her house and it was on the market for like a half a day and she got like in a bidding war and ended up selling it right away. So I hope that for you
Whoa.
on your selling of your
Thank
place, but
you.
not for you
On
on
the
buying your new
buying side.
place. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I
So,
hope
all
that's
right,
true.
let's talk about this book. So, you wrote this book coming out in a few months here. It's available for pre-order. Once again, it's called "They're Not Gaslighting You: Ditch Therapy Speak and Stop Hunting for Red Flags in Every Relationship."
Mm.
What led you to write this book? Was it a particular experience or observation? Because I think that a lot of people throw therapy language, therapy speak around there, but I haven't seen anyone in the field actually talk about it. So what led you to write this book?
Well, this is the first book on therapy speak. There's no research on therapy speak yet. So I feel like this is sort of an uncharted territory, but every therapist amongst themselves is thinking about and talking with their colleagues about therapy speak in their sessions. And I think we've all always used it in our relationships casually. Therapists even have casually. But then people started using it in their sessions, in individual therapy, diagnosing people and wondering if they have disorders. And then what really started to worry me was that I'm a couples therapist. So I have couples coming in, diagnosing each other in front of me, asking me to verify diagnoses or
Whoa.
terms of abuse. And I was like, this is really quite truly out of hand. And then I wrote a blog post called "Is Your Ex a Sociopath?" And so many people read it. And I was like, oh, this is a real problem if this many people are wondering. It was kind of an offhand blog post, but it turns out everyone has just gotten really addicted to diagnosing and not doing it correctly.
Well, what is correctly diagnosing? Because I think that what's ambiguous, and you actually talk about this early on in your book, to me, what's ambiguous about like mental health diagnosis is that it's obviously like not as clear as diagnosing someone with the flu, which I just got diagnosed with, as you know, a week ago. So it's a little bit, I don't know if ambiguous is the right term because there are clinical reasons for it, but what's the clinical diagnosis process like for someone like you who's a doctor and qualified to do it?
So, and you're familiar with this as well. Mental health providers have our like diagnostic Bible, which is called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And we're on the 5th edition. It's been through many iterations. And in it is every diagnosis that is recognized by the mental health community and by insurance. And so that is what we use. And they do research on prevalence rates and making sure that it's valid. And there's criteria. And so when you go through, you can read every diagnosis has a list of criteria. You have to meet a certain number for a certain period of time. And there's all sorts of other conditions you have to meet. And then you can have that diagnosis. The tricky part is that a lot of the criteria listed are extremes of normal behavior. And there's a lot of gray area. So I talk about, like, for example, narcissism. A quality of narcissism is envy, but we all feel envy. It's not the extreme envy that a narcissist feels, is consumed by, but it's very easy to look at the narcissistic criteria and think of someone you don't like in your life and just start checking off boxes because they probably are a little bit like all of those things, but maybe not actual, narcissistic personality disorder level. So it's this gray area that's really difficult for people. The nuance required is hard.
Yeah, and I think narcissist is a good one to maybe jump in a tiny bit on because I hear that one thrown around more than probably anything. The only other one is probably, which isn't even a diagnosis, but like boundaries is thrown around a lot. But, narcissist, the sociopath, with narcissism, it feels like every single person has just decided their ex is a narcissist. Every single person who supports that person believes that that person that's their ex is a narcissist.
Narcissist.
So what, first of all, what would classify beyond envy a narcissist diagnosis? How common are they, or how rare are they in reality? And then, well, let's start there, and then we can go to how throwing this term around about every ex is damaging.
Yeah. So, I mean, narcissists have certain, I think there's like 8 or 9 criteria and you have to meet 5. So it's things like envy, grandiosity, a lack of empathy, self-aggrandizing behaviors. And it's the person you imagine who is full of themselves, thinks everyone should bow down to them, excessive need for admiration and praise. And then they are very easily wounded because they actually have quite low self-esteem. So they need nothing but positive regard. And if they don't get that, they are quick to devalue and discard people in their lives, which does a lot of damage to people that they're in relationships with, obviously. However, a lot of us have narcissistic traits, either at certain times in our lives because we're teenagers who all appear a little narcissistic, or toddlers are very narcissistic, or you're going through a hard time, or you don't like the person that you're in a relationship or ending a relationship with. So many people who are ending a relationship probably do seem narcissistic. They are not as empathic towards that person. They are self-serving. They are, I don't know, I'm sure there's a lot of accusations of grandiosity, but it doesn't mean that they are an actual narcissist, because if you're a narcissist, you're that way. You're early adulthood, rest of your life, in every context. Maybe it doesn't present as a problem in every relationship or context, but there's no person who's just a narcissist with you. They're a narcissist with everybody, and it presents differently. But the prevalence rates of narcissism have not changed over time significantly.
Oh, really?
They're not going up. We're just seeing it more.
That's crazy, because I've talked to a few people before, specifically about reality TV and influencers and stuff like that, and how we were just speculating about how maybe social media is like breeding more narcissism into people, which that sounds like it's totally wrong, and I feel bad for having that conversation now. But I think a lot of that culture on social media also breeds these conversations, and I know you've talked about that before, but you look at narcissism, and again, you see it thrown around about exes, about other people in your life. Social media, what impact do you feel like social media has had in playing a role in spreading these sort of misconceptions about narcissism, but therapy in general, especially diagnosis?
I think it's most of the problem, to be honest, because people who are not experts, who are not trained, who have not taken classes or been licensed in the mental health field, are feeling pretty comfortable speaking up about what qualifies as a narcissist. And they will give examples that may or may not be true. And if you have a big enough following, people will believe you, and it will have an impact and spread information, whether it's true or not. We've seen that a lot happening.
I've experienced that.
Indeed, you have an intimate knowledge of what that's like. So I think the fact that people are willing to listen to non-mental health experts define these terms and diagnoses, and whatever they say it is, people believe it is like the root cause probably of all of this misinformation, misdiagnosing, and this sense of feeling super comfortable diagnosing, which we've discouraged people from doing forever. Even clinicians are discouraged from overdiagnosing. But now people feel like it's empowering, and it's being educated, and it's tackling problems, to use these words.
Validated too, I bet. People feel validated. Yeah.
Yes, because they've been hurt and they want an explanation, and they don't want it to be their fault. And this is a way of doing that. And it feels approved. It feels clinically approved, even though it's not.
Right. Do you see a lot of therapists misusing these terms in social media and different culture type of outlets? I'm not trying to turn you against your peers, just
my people. I see it a lot less. I think the risk therapists are running is that in their attempts to educate about abuse, all of these clinical terms, diagnoses, they are expanding into really gray area territory and making it seem black and white. like 5 early signs that you're dating a narcissist, or that this is gaslighting, or that's a boundary violation. And it's so nuanced and context dependent and murky. And people can't take that from a quick social media reel or post. I have heard therapists help their individual clients diagnose people in their lives, or even with me when I'm consulting, have used terms incorrectly about my clients. And that has been really upsetting to experience.
I wonder if, and I'm speculating here, but like sometimes I've noticed when I have a lot of knowledge about something, or I'm educated in something, I have to kind of like pull back and realize that like there's a lot of context, a lot of education, a lot of knowledge on stuff that I'm saying that like you could have I could have a conversation with another marketing person who does software marketing, and we could have a total different conversation I could have with someone who's never done software marketing. Do you know what I mean? And like I will sometimes speak as if I'm speaking to another marketer. So I wonder sometimes if it's an inadvertent thing that therapists are using all of their wealth of knowledge and their expertise and their experience, and then they're kind of realizing that not everyone has that context. So when they put this post out there saying, here's the 5 red flags you need to look for, there may be some really good experience, context, and good intentions from there, but that's not the context that the audience has.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And therapists are taught in school to always take into account context and nuance and situational factors, and to be cautious with diagnosing or using terms, because we know that clients can cling to them, whether it's a diagnosis for themselves or someone else. It's an explanation if it makes sense for them, if it's a path forward, right? It can be very hard to then take that away or to challenge it. So we've been taught to proceed with caution. But that has really shifted as the dialogue around mental health has left the therapy room and has entered social media.
It's kind of like when WebMD came alive and everyone just started Googling their symptoms. And now you go to your doctor and you tell your doctor what you have. And you tell your doctor what medication you need to get better. You tell your doctor what surgeries you need, or you self-diagnose yourself. And now it seems like that's spread into the mental health field.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's exactly it. And it's totally understandable. Like I have certainly WebMD'd and found all sorts of really improbable explanations for what I'm experiencing.
I should be dead by now with all the stuff I found out about myself.
You've had everything and you keep surviving. It's so understandable, but symptom spotting is easy to do, where you look for whatever behavioral, emotional, physical symptoms and then try to find a diagnosis to explain them. Or you try to fit yourself or people into a category so that you can make sense of it and have an explanation that makes you feel better. So I get why it happens, but it's really gotten out of control.
Yeah, I think it has too. I'm always surprised, and I know I mentioned this a little bit ahead of time. I don't even think it's just like social media. I think it's, and like common people just using it. You have coaches, life coaches, relationship coaches. There's a coach for everything, which is also, by the way, an unregulated profession, which doesn't, no discouragement. I have met and worked with some great coaches. I've done some of it myself too for others. So I think that, there's a good place for that, but I think some of them, may accidentally get into, the therapy space inadvertently or advertently, I guess, but they're then also perpetuating these terms and conversations with people that maybe they should be having with a therapist instead of a coach who's educated in that field. What do you think?
I totally agree. And I am always sensitive to gatekeeping knowledge or information right from people, but diagnoses and these terms should kind of have gatekeepers. They are incredibly important. They carry a lot of weight. They have a big impact. And so I think it should end up being with a therapist. You explore and arrive at an explanation if it's clinical in nature. And I always think about, and I start the book with explaining when I was in grad school, I self-diagnosed and diagnosed everyone else with everything. And there is such ignorant confidence that people have when they first read about a disorder or a term of like, I know what it means. Here's what it looks like. I can find it. I can name it. And then the more you know, the more you realize context matters. The less you know, the less confidence you have jumping to any of those terms. So I feel like day one grad school, Izzy was like I'll diagnose anyone. Give me 5 minutes. And now, decade later, I'm like, give me 6 months with somebody before I feel comfortable saying for sure what's going on, because there's so much happening and I don't know them that well yet. But everyone else, if you're not in grad school, you're at day one. And so you do feel really confident, even though you shouldn't feel very confident.
That's a good point. And I also think and it's like this with regular physical stuff too, but mental health diagnosis is very nuanced. There's a lot, like you said earlier, a lot of gray area. It isn't a simple test like, a nose swab. Like I got to find out that I had the flu. It isn't as simple. There's assessments that go into it. There's interviewing that goes into it. There's reflection. There's obviously the DSM, diagnostic criteria. There's no way you could just assess all of those things and have the context to diagnose someone anytime fast.
No, it's so hard. And so many diagnoses has overlapping symptoms, right? Like disrupted sleep is a part of almost every diagnosis. So you can take that one and cherry pick and put together a diagnostic picture, which may or may not be accurate. But that's why it does take a fair amount of time or a lot of historical data on someone or testing or whatever it might be to put together a good picture. And then a point I make in the book is the only point that we do, the only reason for all of this is to help somebody figure out a treatment plan so they can feel better. It is not just to explain or justify or accuse. Like, it's to help people get better or to know more about themselves. And I think we've lost sight of that too.
Oh, I didn't even think about that part. Yeah, that's unfortunate, because especially people who do suffer with some severe, I think we all get a little anxious, depressed sometimes, right? But some severity of, having narcissistic personality disorder, borderline, bipolar, all of these things are very serious diagnoses. And when you just kind of label it and you don't think about the struggles that person's dealing with and what would go into a treatment plan for those or many others, it's kind of disregarding to that person and their life experience too.
Oh, absolutely. Because, for example, somebody with borderline, like I say in the book, if they could wave the magical therapy wand and wake up and not have borderline personality, 100% of them would do that. They are suffering. They are not having a good time with this. And so to casually or accusatorily call someone borderline because of something that, is not actually representative of that disorder, it's harming the person who really has it and is trying hard to fix it and is struggling. And then there's certain...
Oh, go ahead.
No.
I was just going to say, that's also not, like, you can maybe find some like cures for anxiety with a medication or depression with medication. Some of these disorders, it seems like the ones that get thrown around the most are the ones that people have to work on every single day for their whole life. And that's what makes me kind of sad when those things are thrown around. Yes.
Yeah, they're persistent and they can be managed, right? And some of them can be, cured to a degree.
I should have said managed, not cured.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, they require lifelong management with therapy or meds, whatever treatment plan you pursue. But again, it's this idea that if we see it and label it and accuse the other person, that somehow that is helpful.
It's a release.
Yeah.
It's almost like the opposite, because like I know when I was finally kind of like diagnosed with depression, it took a load off. It's like, there's not something wrong with me. And when I accepted it, because I did not accept it for a long time. It's like, nope, that ain't me. But, I think it kind of takes a load off. It gives you almost that path forward or that opportunity for a treatment path. And then it's being used in this way to just be accusatory, to justify or validate your feelings of being hurt or whatever. And then it's having the opposite effect. It's not that path forward. It's the end.
Yes. Or it's that other person's path forward, right? It's not your work. It's their work. It's like, listen, I've decided you're bipolar and that's the problem. So like, you go figure that out and fix it. I didn't do anything wrong. This makes a lot of sense to me. So that sounds great. And that does sound great. I would love that too, to have everybody else be the problem and to have to do no self-work. Sign me up. But that's not how it works.
That is not how it works. And I think too, my favorite life lesson that I've ever learned is that I cannot control anything. I can just control how I react to it. And if I think someone's a narcissist, or I think someone's, whatever the term that I choose to throw out there is, like, I can only control how I react to that, and I can't change them, and I don't need to blame them. And I think that's something that is hard to learn, especially when you're heartbroken.
Yes. But that's the empowering part, right? Like, let's say you are really in a relationship with a narcissist and you're talking to your therapist about it, and you're both noticing patterns of bad behavior that's really impacting you, making it impossible to have a healthy relationship. That's helpful to know. Like, maybe you shouldn't diagnose this person, and your therapist shouldn't because they've never met them. But like, clearly there's traits, clearly there's a problem. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to address this, change boundaries, leave this relationship? Not how are you going to tell the other person that they're a narcissist and they have to change if you're going to stay with them? Because that doesn't work.
Yeah. Can a narcissist be in a healthy relationship?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. We think of narcissists sort of like with sociopaths, it's like the worst case scenario. But there's different levels of severity for all of these symptoms and presentations. So there can be like lower level narcissists who meet some criteria and have mild symptoms, and they can be problematic, but they can have some insight, some empathy. There's room for change there. Then there's like the really extreme narcissist where there's not much you can do. And that's a relationship you should probably just exit, which is why, again, it's so hard to say you are this disorder, because within even the criteria of that disorder, people present so differently.
Yeah, that's true. I want to touch on something really quickly, and then I want to go to more of these terms that are very popularly thrown around that you address in your book. But you said earlier on that in your couple sessions, you will sometimes have a couple that's just throwing therapy speak. I'm sure boundaries gets thrown around a lot. I'm sure the diagnosis goes around. What's it like for you as a therapist to sit in a couple session where people are misusing these terms and diagnoses?
It's hard because they do such damage and they stop conversation. And this is a big issue, is that once you say you're gaslighting me, like, there is no more vulnerability and exploration. The person accused of that has to either accept it and apologize and mea culpa their way into repair, or they have to defend themselves and explain what they were trying to do, or why it wasn't gaslighting. Which the person could say, you're still gaslighting me. You still won't admit what you did, right? Like, we're off on this unproductive path. So it really ends vulnerability and conversation. And I'm a therapist who stops and interjects and says, that term means something really specific and has a lot of weight. Like, I want to know if that really is what was happening or not. Let's talk about it. And now, because most of my clients know I wrote this book, they will say the term and then say, I know that's probably not right. It's probably not how you're supposed to use it, blah, blah, blah. I'm just recognizing that. So there's more room for conversation, but I do stop and correct people.
I think gaslighting is, in the name of the book, probably the most overused and misused term. And I'm guilty, but I will throw it out there, and I'm guilty of it. But I think too, like, let's define gaslighting in a second, but I think people think that gaslighting is a disagreement.
Yes.
And a lot of times it's a disagreement or a misunderstanding. And I think think people try so hard to communicate, and I think so many people are ineffective at it. At least my experience in relationships, with friendships. I mean, you should see, I was just telling you earlier, my guy friends and I are going to WWE next week, and us trying to coordinate this trip has been like 4 months, and there's a lot of avoidance. There's a lot of lack of decision making. There's a lot of, well, we did it this way last year. No, we didn't. And it's like, it's hilarious. Yeah. And it's like, it's hilarious. We're like gaslighting each other about how we planned the trip last year. And it's just funny stuff there. But I think that, if you had to define gaslighting in the clinical sense, what does it mean?
I'll just start by saying this is not in the DSM. This is a term born from a movie adopted by psychologists.
Wait, which movie was it born from?
Gaslight. And the whole...
I did know that. I learned that a lot of years ago. Okay, I forgot about that.
So then psychologists recognized this is actually a pretty common abuse tactic, and then they started using it. And now it sort of has a life of its own. Like, there's no official APA approved, right, definition with examples in the same way that a diagnosis has, which is why it's proliferated into
That's
what
why
it
it
is
has taken
today.
a life of its own.
It truly has. It's supposed to represent, typically, almost always, in an abusive relationship, when the abusive partner, the perpetrator, convinces the other person that their perception of reality is wholly false and that they shouldn't trust themselves because they're perceiving things so inaccurately. So things that are true, right? Like, you got home at 11 p.m. last night. What were you doing? No, I didn't. I didn't get home at 11 p.m. Like, what clock were you looking at? That's crazy that you would even think that. Like, and why are you trying to trap me? Why are you following me in my every move? And they flip it to like, not only are you wrong, but like, why are you being the bad actor in this? That's gaslighting.
It's like the spin. I used to describe it as I felt like I was being spun around in a chair.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like a desk chair, you're getting spun around and you're switching directions. And at some point you don't even know what you're talking about anymore, which is where, the confusion comes. But so you would say it kind of is the person who's being asked or questioned or accused of something, then spinning it to make it about the other person and something they did or didn't do that actually has nothing to do with what actually happened.
Yes. Yeah, they make that person lose trust in themselves, think that they're going crazy, think they don't actually perceive reality as reality exists. And gaslighting is not like a one-time thing. You know, it's usually insidious. It's a slow build, lies feed into lies until the survivor like really doesn't know what's true or not anymore. And gaslighting it's reversing the victim and offender role. It's a way of saying, I'm not doing anything wrong. You're doing things wrong. And like, it's kind of crazy you would come at me like that. Like, you're really the problem here. So it's a big part of an abusive relationship. Really healthy relationships don't have gaslighting.
Yeah. Do you think gaslighting like extends beyond relationships from couples relationships, like into family dynamics, friends dynamics? Yeah. Absolutely.
Yes. Any relational system can have it.
I feel like we've all actually experienced it, even if we don't realize it. I mean, it's such even sometimes I feel like I'm getting gaslighted, like watching the news or even like sports. Sometimes I'm like, wait a minute, that's not how that happened. But it just seems like it's a very like the practice of it is common and it happens, you know, very deliberately to some people in one-to-one relationships. But the way people are just throwing this around every time they have a disagreement or every time they get questioned about something, it's just it's very damaging. And I actually didn't even think about it not having an official like APA definition. So
I mean, I'm sure they have it written down somewhere, but it's not like a protected term. So it has a lot of room to grow, and it has certainly grown. I think gaslighting is what people use when they feel like someone disagreed, when someone lied, or when someone invalidated what they said or how they felt. And those things can be a part of gaslighting. Like, gaslighting always includes those, but those things are not always gaslighting.
Do you think people that are gaslighters know they're gaslighting, or do you think it's something that they're not aware they're doing? Or is it a mix?
It's a mix. Some are. You know, you take like the extreme psychopath, they certainly know they're gaslighting. They enjoy it. They think of it as like a skill that they would love to hone. They like manipulating people, right? They get a sense of enjoyment out of that. There are some people who are just emotionally immature, inflexible, like can't imagine that their perspective isn't right. And they are inadvertent gaslighters. I don't know if one does more damage than the other, but it's not always like a thought out tactic. Sometimes people just do it.
Yeah, I often wonder sometimes because I feel like I have had people in my life that were nefarious about it, but then I have people I think didn't know they were doing it at various times. And at the same as the, you know, victim or whatever of it, it is very, very much a, like you just start to feel like you're crazy. Like those are the feelings I have. Like, I'm feeling crazy because my recollection of things that happened is wrong, is very clear to me. But now I'm like, wait a minute. What am I the problem? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. That is gaslighting. That's a great example. If that's the outcome, you're probably being gaslit. If you're fighting about what happened in a conversation from a week ago and you both remember it differently, that's not gaslighting. Like that's just human nature, is to have different memories of the same experience and to think that yours is right. And so in the book, as you know, I go through an example of what it actually is, whatever the term or diagnosis actually is, a case study example, and then a definition of what it's supposed to mean, and then an example of it being misused or weaponized, and then a definition of what we're getting wrong with this term. Yeah. And with gaslighting, I think that's, important piece is like, you feel how you felt. Like, I am truly going crazy. Like, I guess I am wrong.
Well, and I think to go to the book, and then I've got some other terms I think are good to talk about.
Do it.
What I like about the book is, and you said you have the case study in there. I like that you actually define what these things are too, kind of in layman's terms in a non-clinical fashion, because what I do think is we're a headline clickbait. I don't even say we don't even have clickbait anymore. Like, people don't click, they just read the headline. And so when you see a term like gaslighting and you see it defined on a social media meme or a post or even a meme, like where it's taking the most extreme version of it to make you laugh, but it also kind of like muddies the water on what it actually is. But I think with this book, the definition of some of these terms and diagnoses that are thrown around so frequently, just defining them in layman's terms, I think would be very helpful for people who just don't know. And that's the thing, I don't even blame people. Like, I think that the way society and social media set us up, it's a clickbait, it's a meme, it's a headline, it's a
reductionist approach.
Reel, and it can't. And I think therapists, for the most part that I've seen, do a very good job in their captions of saying, hey, reminder, this isn't replacement for therapy. I'm not your therapist, all of that stuff. But at the same time, it seems to just encourage people to have these base level headline or meme versions or definitions of what these terms are. And that's where maybe the core of the confusion becomes. So that's what I like about the book. And I think the case studies are good too, because then you kind of humanize a person. I think there was one Fiona, I remember.
Oh, is that the borderline
one?
Bipolar,
or is that borderline? I can't remember. Those are the two of the chapters I read. I can't remember.
Does she chop vegetables in it?
Yes.
That's bipolar. That's the bipolar one.
yeah, that's the one. But that's what I think. That's what I like about the book, is I think it kind of layman's terms it, and it doesn't get too clinical. And giving the real life examples also makes it, or the case studies makes it relatable as well. So more of these terms that get thrown around. Another one I want to talk about is red flags, which is also in the title. As someone who has had countless red flags posted across my social media over the years, I look at it and I'm like, and I just learned what a beige flag was a few months ago, which is another one I've heard thrown around. But red flag, not a clinical term, but thrown around I think everyone's been called a red flag at some point. Talk to me about red flags. What are your thoughts? And the
red flag. So again, it's not like a real clinical term. I think it has an interesting clinical application. I mean, its original meaning is red flag is like severe danger. Be scared for your life. And it's supposed to be evidence that somebody you're in any kind of relationship with is going to be a huge problem. They're going to be unsafe. They're going to be unhealthy. They're going to do damage to you in your life. Like someone physically harming you. Huge red flag. That means they are not a safe person. Get out, right? But red flag, like gaslighting, has like expanded and embraced new things. And it's a lot of identifying early red flags before you get to the big red flag, right? Sort of trying to preemptively avoid stuff. And now red flag means anything and everything. It's sort of like toxic, which is also in the book. It's like, God. This is bad. This is bad to some degree. Be aware of this. It represents part of their personality or how they're going to be in a relationship that you should be aware of. And the problem is that we all have red flags. Like we all do things.
I've got the dating event tonight, and I had to stop myself. I'm having a question to be like, what is your biggest red flag? Because
I kind of like that though, because it's saying you have one, and so does everyone else in this room that you're talking to.
I decided to change it to how would your last romantic relationship describe you?
Ooh,
as a red flag.
That's a good question.
I know. I think that's a tough one. I pity the
Yeah.
people that get that one or have to answer that one. I don't know who I feel worse for, asking it or answering it.
Wow. That's a great one. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
What would be
but
you're happily married, but what would be your red flag? Your biggest
I
red flag?
I have so many of them. I mean, I've had a lot, especially when I was younger. I had tons of red
Oh,
flags.
walking red
Absolute
flag.
mess. I mean, my probably continued red flag is that I still struggle with not just shutting down and escaping
Mm.
in conflict. You know, like, and I'm aware of it, and I can now like pretty much say like I don't think I can do this conversation anymore. Like I'm completely gone, so like I can voice that and take space. But yeah, it's really bad. I'll just be like, I'm the person who jumps to, I guess this isn't gonna work out. I guess this is it. Like I just go to the catastrophic
On to the
escapism.
next.
I guess this is over then. Everyone's like, what? I think that's a pretty good red flag.
That's it. That is a really good one. And you know what I think is interesting about that too is like here you are, you're a doctor, you have your doctorate in psychology, you're a couples therapist, you know exactly what works and what doesn't work in relationships, and you can be aware enough to know that you've got some qualities that probably got to work through to make it work in a relationship.
Yeah. And I mean, that's exactly right. As I feel like I have such an acceptance for the fact that we are all works in progress forever. And there are some things that I'll
Mm-hmm.
be working on for my whole life and will never fix. And there'll be new things that crop up that I have to figure out and work on. And that's okay. That's just part of being a human. And if you're trying to find this like perfect human who doesn't have red flags and like the newer misused version of red flags, you're just going to end up alone.
Mm-hmm. And I think that we don't have to go in this direction, but that's trickled into dating culture. That's trickled
Oh,
into the
I bet.
loneliness epidemic, dating apps. I think people are very quick to red flag someone and go away. I found this funny
Mm-hmm.
reel. I actually should, I'm going to send it to you when we get out of here because
Yeah.
I didn't save it, but I sent it to other people. It's this guy and he's just talking about what it's like dating being a guy. Like if I don't respond quick enough, that's a red flag. If I respond too
Too
quick,
quickly.
that's
Mm-hmm.
the ick. That's a red flag. And then if I say the wrong thing or I ask the wrong question or I wait too long to reply, like everything's a red flag. Everything you can do, everything you
Yeah.
can't do is a red flag. And I know now when I date, I kind of lay out on the table. I'm like, here's my expectations for how this is going to go. I'm not going to play games. I'm
Mm.
not ignoring you. I'm if I'm not responding, it's because I'm busy or I haven't seen it or something. It's not a game. I
Mm-hmm.
am going to be honest and upfront with you about where I'm at and how I'm feeling as we go through this process. Like I literally just
Oh, I
lay it
love
out.
that.
I lay it, but you know, it scares people. And then it's like, whoa, that's too much too soon. I'm like, I'm literally just communicating with you. It's,
Wow.
but it's
Well,
that,
that's a red flag.
yeah,
It's too much too soon. It's too much
it's,
disclosure. Mm-hmm.
yep. And
Yeah.
I think it's very sad because I think it gives people, like the red flag thing specifically gives people an out, but it also
Mm-hmm.
um, kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because we all have red flags.
Well, right. I mean, this is back to like perception is reality. Like if you are on the hunt for red flags, you are going to find them. It's the same phenomenon as when you decide you're going to buy this new car and suddenly you see it on the road everywhere. It's because you're now focused
Mm,
on it, you're attuned to it, your mind is looking out for it and clocking it. If you are looking for red flags, you will find them. Vigilance will find them, and people are looking for red flags. It's a self protective measure, which I have such empathy for. Nobody
yeah.
wants to get hurt. Nobody wants to be caught with an abusive partner. Like we all are trying to protect ourselves, but this has gone so overboard with now, like nobody can be imperfect with you.
I know. And I do think that's why we have so many lonely people because it's just the concept of endless opportunities, the connectivity of dating apps, the connectivity of social
Yeah,
media and stuff. And then you just see one thing that you may not even fully understand. That's the thing. Like you may
we
not even fully
assume.
understand it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's this idea that because we have access to the DSM information through social media or the internet, that if we know better, we should do better. Like if people know what a boundary violation is, they shouldn't commit a boundary violation. But we know a lot of stuff and still do it. I know close to everything about what there is to know about being in a good romantic relationship. And I still do a bunch of this stuff. We just don't always have the capacity or motivation to do the right thing, or we're, taken over by our emotions and not thinking straight. So people are just going to keep messing up with you forever. And that's not the measure of a good or bad person. It's if you want to work through those moments and get to the other side and do that forever. That's what you're looking for. But nobody gets the chance to even get to that point. It's sort of what you're saying of like, one red flag, you're gone.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of projection. I think you see something, you see something that, and this is probably my red flag, is like you see something and it kind of like reminds you of something that didn't work in the past. And then all of a sudden you've like projected all of that as that person's red flag, when the reality is it's your red flag, because now you're projecting your past experience onto somebody else.
Yes. And not that I don't get into this in the book very much, but we all have deep wounds and fears and sensitivities that we carry with us into any relationship, right? Like that's our baggage is sort of the colloquial way we talk about it. I don't care who you find, how great they are going to touch upon your sensitivity, your wound, your greatest fear, because it's yours. It's not going anywhere. So no matter how good they are, you're going to feel bad with them at some point, and that is not a reason to run.
I love that. I always think to myself, and I think this with friends too, I'm like, is this person deliberately trying to hurt me? If the answer is no, I try to like let my emotions dissipate a little bit and approach it from okay, they're not trying to hurt me. So they're coming from a place of misunderstanding, past pain, something like that. Self-protectiveness. Yeah, that's that it's really fucking hard to do, and I don't do it all the time, but I really. Well, we've talked before. There's times where I'm like, I have empathy for this person. Like I feel bad for this person, and maybe I shouldn't, but.
I mean, and me too. Again, it's like you can know better and not always do better. Humans are not a perfect species. We have baser instincts like all animals, and that's okay.
And do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly.
There's a reason that's a saying. You touched on this, and this is the one I feel like we kind of have talked a little bit about this on past podcasts, the holiday one a couple years ago. But you have a whole chapter on boundaries, and I consider myself, boundaries saved my life. Like I love boundaries. I love putting them up. I love protecting myself with them. They're a wonderful, wonderful tool. Yeah. But, and I first noticed this, and I know we've talked about this before, they get weaponized one-to-one in conversations. And I think what we saw happen with, what was the girl's name?
Oh, Sarah.
Jonah Hill. And what was the girl's name?
Sarah something, her name. Right?
Yeah, but when those text messages of Jonah Hill and his, at the time, girlfriend, he was so clearly weaponizing boundaries that was the first time I felt like I was like, whoa,
that doesn't feel right.
That doesn't feel right. We're really misusing this term. And like I said, I have learned boundaries inside and out for myself, and they've been a real game changer for my mental health and my overall wellness across the board. But that one there, because it kind of ringed a little close to me, where I was like, that doesn't seem like the right use of boundaries. So, how would you define what boundaries actually are? I've said this before, but like a boundary not enforced is just a recommendation. And so, what is a boundary? How do you see them being used properly? And, or let's start with, how do you see them being used improperly, whatever.
Improperly, yeah. So in a general sense, a boundary is your lines that you need to not have crossed so that you can feel safe and secure in a relationship, in a context, whatever it might be. I split boundaries apart in this book into two different types. Universal boundaries of like things that we all should know and respect. Like it is never okay to physically attack someone, right? It's never okay to steal from someone's bank account. These are just like basic, there's no excuse for it, except for, I'm sure philosophers will find one small situation in which it would make sense. Right. What about in this scenario? Sure. There might be some specific scenarios. But
we've got people talking about Luigi Mangione right now as if he's some sort of messiah.
God.
And,
Yeah.
So we're seeing it in real time, but
yeah. But like so if you focus on yourself, you would not want anyone to assault you, to steal from you, right? To like emotionally harm you in like clearly abusive ways. Those are universal boundaries. If somebody crosses that boundary, that is a red flag. That is super concerning. You should feel warned. You should do something about it. And then there's a bunch of individual boundaries that vary from person to person. And for each person, it varies with whoever they're in a relationship with, where they are in their life, and the context that they're in. So it's these boundaries that people are enforcing too heavily and having too high expectations for. Because I think people are quick to say, that's my boundary, that was a boundary violation. But the thing is, boundaries are only known when they're communicated or when they've been crossed.
And you say that in the book. You actually say, like, did that person violate a boundary, or did you not communicate that boundary?
Right. If they don't know what it is and they do whatever that thing is, you can't just be mad at them. They didn't know. And so now that's happened. You've been hurt. They're learning about you. They now know that you don't want them to do that. Great. That is information. That is healing from a rupture in your relationship. That's totally fine and healthy and normal. Don't weaponize that. If they keep doing it over and over again without any regard for your sense of safety or happiness, that's a problem.
Mm.
But the other thing about...
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just going to, I think that's the important thing too, that I'm sure impacts a lot of relationships, is that you haven't communicated a boundary that is uncommunicated has been violated. That person doesn't know they violated. They don't even get the chance to respect that boundary. And then all of a sudden you've got this, miscommunication, potentially, for lack of a better word, that, torpedoes a budding relationship.
Mm-hmm. And boundaries shift over time. On your first date, you probably would think it was weird if your date grabbed your phone to go looking through it to orders, like whatever it might be. But if you've been married for 5 years, maybe you don't care if your spouse grabs your phone to order something or look at it, right? Like they're just constantly shifting depending on where you're at, what's happened to you in your life, if you have to shore up boundaries or loosen boundaries. It's this idea that like we should just know other people's boundaries is not fair to everybody. And this is hard for people. It's sort of like you said, it's up to you to enforce your own boundaries. You cannot expect everyone else to just respect them because you've said, this is my boundary, so you should respect it.
Yeah, I mean, I give these tips and pointers. I think we talked about this on the Boundaries for the Holidays podcast too. But what I find with a lot of people, and I've watched it, and I have a lot of people through DMs and stuff that have asked me about boundaries because I don't think people know what their boundaries are. Yeah. And I think that's kind of a thing that I didn't know. Like I didn't know. I've shared this example before, but I didn't know that like being around my family all the time, like every Sunday, every whatever, like was very stressful for me. I didn't realize that. And so once I kind of realized that, and I was like, oh, I don't have to go there every Sunday. I'm going to not go every Sunday. Mm-hmm. And that changed my whole weekend trajectory once I decided that was going to be, a less frequent activity for me. And I, tell them that, and in a nicer way, which is now I don't have a car, so I can't drive out to the suburbs, but which is true. But so it is. I think a lot of people just don't know them, and I think when they kind of do the work, that's what's important. So, like, do you have any quick advice that you can give people who don't know how to set boundaries, don't even know what theirs are, and can kind of do some reflection to figure out, hey, maybe this is a boundary that I need to communicate and then enforce? It's a two-step process.
I think you first have to know when you don't feel good. And some people, more avoidant people, more people-pleasing people won't know when that is, of like when you feel unhappy, when you feel taxed, when you feel uncomfortable, whatever it might be. You've got to know a bad feeling is happening in you before you can figure out where it's coming from. So I think that self-awareness and that emotional attunement is the first really important piece. And then I think people need to give themselves freedom to create whatever they want to with their life. There's a lot of ideas of what we should do as a son, as a spouse, as a friend, that like, we can't say no to this. We can't change this because it's not what's expected. But if you just took all those rules away and just made your own set of rules, what would that look like? And there's your boundaries.
Well, that makes it sound so simple. It only
I
took me
know.
33 years to figure that out. But
It's probably not that simple, though. It's hard to know. And then, enforcing boundaries can piss people off or it can hurt them. Even if and I'm a big proponent of, you don't have to tell someone, I'm enforcing a new boundary with you now. This is the change. I don't think you have to do that most of the time. You can just change your behavior, and that will be enforcing your new boundary. And if there's pushback or questions, you can directly address it. But people are allowed to change their mind and
yeah.
shift how they operate.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, mine changed too. I think everyone's changed. But going back to throw Jonah Hill under the bus a little bit more and how this is, how are people, in your view, how are you seeing people misuse boundary and kind of, I feel like it's become one of the more weaponized terms that gets thrown around in conflict. Besides like throwing diagnoses at people, I think like gaslighting and boundaries are the ones that I see the most just thrown out there.
Yeah. I see narcissists a lot too, but I do a lot of couples work, so that might be why. Boundaries is a problem because it is easy for it to be controlling, which is what we saw with Jonah Hill, right? Of like, because you're saying this is a boundary, it's something that I need for my safety and security, you have to comply and do what I'm asking of you, or you're a bad person. And that is very controlling. You don't get to dictate what other people say or do or feel just because it's your boundary, unless it's a universal boundary, right? Don't physically harm me. Yes, you get to demand that from people in your life. But everything else is you making a choice to protect whatever it is. And what he was doing was telling someone, you can't do these things. Like, it's taking away her autonomy and framing it as it's for his mental health.
Which, so, man, that whole thing just gave me the ick. It's just, it was such a weaponizing way to use that term that it's just kind of, it becomes abusive. It just,
well,
or no,
I'm so glad you brought that up. No, I'm so glad you brought that up because like a big message in my book is that I'm concerned with how abusive people have taken these terms and weaponized them. We give deference to clinical terms and diagnoses. People are less inclined to challenge them, and they make somebody seem like an expert or seem right. And abusive people are so good at taking a term like boundaries or borderline, whatever it might be, and controlling their partner by using them. And often, and I've seen this, unfortunately, recruiting an individual therapist to agree. They present a certain story, a certain side, their perspective, and the therapist says, yeah, that person sounds, like they're violating your boundaries. They sound narcissistic. They sound bipolar. And now they have, verification that they use against their partner. And that really scares me.
I've seen that in my own experiences where people kind of do weaponize something their therapist told them in a conversation as well. And I think that is also like, I think what you talk about with your therapist is in that room and in that room only, no matter what they say, whether they are challenging you, challenging your partner, challenging you to challenge your partner, throwing out, yeah, that sounds like narcissism or whatever. Like that is not something for you to take out in the world and weaponize.
I know. I strongly feel that therapy terms should stay in the therapy room. They are there to help you understand, explain, explore, empower so that you know what to do with that relationship, with that situation. They're not meant to be actively used, especially in an accusatory way. And that's what's happening now. And then the therapist is sort of complicit unknowingly, they're contributing to the problem. And I want to say, I think therapists are in a hard spot with this. And I have a lot of empathy for all of us, but we have to be the leaders in fixing this problem as well.
Which is my next question for you. I think, and you can share your view on this too, I think social media has done so much to remove the stigma around mental health. I've shared my experience. I had not talked about it for the longest time as a man with shame about it, and now I do. But I credit a lot of that to social media, to seeing other men, to seeing other people actively speak about their mental health struggles. And it's empowering and it's done so much good. But like all things, too much of a good thing can turn bad. And so what I'd like to get your perspective on here is do you believe that there's good out of this? And then what do we do, and what do you call on therapists to do to sort of take back these terms and really give them the validity and the meaning that they're supposed to have?
Great questions. I think, given the whole subject of the book, this might sound funny. I think on the whole, it's a net positive that social media exists, that the internet gave people information, that things are less stigmatized, people feel more comfortable sharing their stories. I feel like this is such a benefit, such a good thing. It does outweigh the cost of weaponized and misuse therapy speak. Absolutely. I think the pendulum has swung too far from, you should be committed in an insane asylum for the rest of your life to everyone is a toxic narcissist. And that the pendulum can even out to where it's okay to talk about your struggles and have dialogue, and we don't have to diagnose everybody and label absolutely everything for it to be real and solvable. And I think therapists are on the front lines. I think they have to be 10 times more cautious introducing a term. I think they have to qualify it. I think they have to say, I can't diagnose this person because I've never met them. They seem to have some traits. I wonder if it's helpful to view them through this lens, if that would make sense for how you want to manage your relationship with this person. Like, there should be a lot more language around any of these words that they use. And I do call upon therapists to challenge these words when they're used incorrectly in sessions. And that doesn't have to be in a judgmental or condescending way, but I think it's our responsibility to uphold the meanings of the terms.
I think that's a great call to action, actually having therapists correct in sessions, take back control of what these words actually mean. So before we get wrapped up here, is there anything else that you want people to take away from your new book, They're Not Gaslighting You?
If you read it, you'll see that I give plenty of self-disclosures of how imperfect I am and all of my foibles and how I've fallen prey to all of these trends. And I think my
right
big
at the
message,
beginning, your grad school ones are funny, like the anxiety, and you had this.
Yeah. What was
there's
so many.
Who was your ex? Was it Noah?
I gave him a pseudonym. It's Noah in the book.
Okay. Okay.
He knows, and I actually texted him. We don't stay in a lot of contact, but I was like, I just want to give you a heads up. I am writing about you in this book. And he was like, okay, what are you saying? And I was like, I do talk about the prom breakup situation. He was like, man, just can't let that one go. And I was like, no. It was formative, so no.
But wait, his name isn't actually Noah, did you say? Okay.
No.
What's his real name? You want to spill the tea?
I'll protect his privacy.
You don't have to do that.
He may come forward if he dislikes what I said and disagrees with it. Maybe he'll call me out.
It's like, this book is gaslighting me.
That's not what I remember, is he? Oh, God.
Sorry, I interrupted you. What you want people to take away from the book?
That people are really messy and imperfect and trying their best and failing, and that I think we could leave a lot more room for compassion and error in our relationships and focusing more on our own self-growth. Like, you can only control what's within your control, and to shift the spotlight from pathologizing other people to seeing how we can grow better as a person.
It's a good message. Well, I am grateful for the advanced copy. As you know, I also ordered one, which I'll have you autograph next time I see you.
Awesome.
But I just want to reiterate, the book is available for pre-sale right now. The link is down in the show notes. I've read several chapters. Oh, one thing I really like about the book too, which I know I already told you, but after the first 2 chapters, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure, like what chapter speaks to you. And having done that, like, it actually is like each chapter is almost like a mini book of its own, addressing a specific topic or diagnosis or misdiagnosis in most cases. So the book is I'm not going to say it's an easy read, but it's cool to kind of like pop around on what's interesting you in that moment. So highly recommend. The pre-orders are at the link in the show notes. Before we go and everything with our day, is there anything you want to ask me for Ask Me Anything? Even though we text like every day and you probably ask me not on the podcast, but.
Well, I actually do have something I want to ask you. I was curious, what's your favorite part of doing these singles events? Like, what are you seeing happening at the events? How are people responding to being in person and meeting people? Because I'm so curious. I think this is the future of dating, and I want to know.
I think it is too. So it's funny because I did a follow-up podcast episode, and it went like a little viral, and the comments are nuts. Like, it's everything from "this is the greatest thing ever" to "only incels go to these things." I mean, the comment section was totally wild. So my experience, it's funny because like my experience of actually going to the event and talking to people and then seeing the online experience of how people viewed it, it's totally opposite, and it kind of shows you like what happens on the internet ain't real life and not always your experience. And that to me was the first big sort of like eye opener, because I went to that event back in November that I co-hosted. We had over 200 people. I was expecting 20 to show up. We had over 200 people show up. We have another one tonight, which is Friday, January 24th. So a few days when this comes out, it'll be a few days before that. We sold out yesterday, 250 people. It's almost a 50-50 split of men and women after we've been, I knew the men weren't going to buy tickets till the last minute. That's just how we are. Like if I wasn't hosting this event, I would still be a maybe right now. And it's in a couple hours. That's just how we are. So the men finally came through. But what I've noticed is there's an excitement about these events. And what I think is so unique about what we're doing with our events here in Chicago is we're not just bringing singles together, but I think that's important because our behaviors have changed since COVID, and dating has changed since COVID. And I've even observed that when I'm out at a bar or something, people don't interact outside of their group anymore. And remember, for years, we weren't allowed to. You had a table of 6 people and you weren't allowed to get up unless you were putting your mask on and, moving around. So I think those behaviors have come into like real life dating. But what's nice and what people like is that they know everyone there is single. So that's barrier number 1 removed. Everyone's wearing a name tag. What's your name? Barrier number 2 moved. What we do to kind of give a unique and different experience that people have really gravitated towards is we have conversation starter cards, convo starters, I call them. And we have different questions that everyone gets when they come in, which I didn't know that I agreed to that, but that's what we're doing now. Everyone's going to get a conversation starter and they'll be on the tables and stuff too. So there's different ways to start a conversation with someone, and actually not like yes or no questions. They're actually questions designed to help people get to know each other. And with that, myself and my partner, Anita, who's also a couples dating and relationship therapist, she better than me, but like we're coaching people and trying to help people start conversations if they're nervous, or introduce people to kind of give them, that little bit of an extra nudge. And also, once you join the newsletter list, we just sent out, I think it was yesterday, like best practices for meeting people in real life at this event. So we're trying to do more of the like nudging and helping people get through those initial barriers. And I know that there was one person I specifically talked to at the last event that had 2 phone numbers that she got out of that event. I know that there were several dates that came out of that event. I know there was a couple that came out of that event. So they were doing holidays together. So it was like 6 weeks later, they were in a very serious meeting the families on the holidays.
My God.
So I think there's a hunger for it. And I think that there's a need for it. But I think it's more than just, while some people are attracted to the idea of just being in a room full of singles, I think there's more to it to kind of overcome those still existent barriers of making that introduction, breaking the ice, getting a conversation started. So we'll see how we continue to evolve these things. But I think that's kind of like my biggest takeaway. And honestly, people are so sick of the apps. But the last thing I'll say is, what's important to the success at this event, the most important thing in my view, is if you're going to go through the awkwardness and uncomfortableness of meeting someone in real life, make sure that you don't behave in past behaviors that you may have done on dating apps, because that's a totally So if you're avoidant, you're a slow responder, you don't make plans, like don't come to these events. We want people that are
ready to meet someone,
ready to actually meet someone and go on dates. So I think that's going to be sort of the big change. And I think that's the kind of people that these events are going to be attracting. Because the apps, I haven't even been on them in years, and they were terrible years ago. Everyone
hates the apps. Absolutely. Yeah. I'll just point out the irony that this is the exact opposite of Love is Blind. Love is meeting people in person, seeing each other first thing, which is the way that I think it should happen. But
yeah, that's true. That's true. And again, to me, when I'm dating, and this is what advice I'll leave people with, when I'm dating, I actually want to get to know someone and, lay out, here's my expectations of, here's how I date. If these make sense to you, cool. If not, goodbye. And I think that kind of mindset coming into these events is what's going to breed success if you're actually looking for someone to be your partner.
Yeah. And you're going to bring it to Boston.
There's people asking for like every city. So,
does it have a name? Does it have a?
Yeah, well, our company's called On Love Experiences, which is Anita's Instagram handle is Anita on Love. So I kind of borrowed it. We borrowed it from that. Okay. And then maybe one day we'll start a podcast called Nick and Anita on Love, which will be fun. So it seemed like a fun thing. So it's On Love Experiences, or On Love X. And then X being like the variable for all the different experiences. And then we're just calling them whatever the city name is, and then singles parties. Okay. So keeping it light. Everybody gets a drink ticket with your ticket. You get a conversation starter when you come in. You get a name tag. This time we have gift certificates that were donated to give to the first 230 people. And then our friend Chris, camera Chris, actually donated a raffle item for a 30-minute photo shoot with him at his new studio here in Chicago. So
that's cool.
Got some giveaways. Yeah, all sorts of, it's really coming together.
You know what? I'll donate a book. You want a book?
There you go.
For the one you do in May?
Yeah, for sure. Let's do that. We'll take it. Maybe two. Really cool. One for a guy, one for a girl.
There you go.
We need to get that around.
There you go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good for you.
Cool.
It's really cool.
Well, thank you. Tell people where they can find you. And again, links all in the show notes, but where can people get your book? Where can people connect with you on social?
So you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Isabelle Morley. My website is drisabellemorley.com. You can get the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Pessy. It's pre-order now and out May 20th, and it'll get shipped to you.
Outstanding. I highly recommend it. It's a very important topic. I think needs to be discussed and needs to be put into layman's terms so more people can understand it. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Taking a leadership role on that. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Awesome to be here. As always, lovely to chat with you.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. If you enjoy the show, the best way to support us is by sharing or dropping a review. For more information and content, check out engagewithnick.com or find me on Instagram at nthompson513. Don't go through life blind. Do the work so you can show up in the world with your eyes wide open.